Hey, I'm Shawn Kanungo. This is another episode of Dangerous Ideas. We break down concepts and frameworks that will change your life. Hey, my name is Shawn Kanungo. This is another episode of Dangerous Ideas. In this episode, what we do is in this podcast, we break down concepts and frameworks that will change your life, change your career, change your business, but most importantly, change your life. And I want to remind you on this podcast, it's not an interview podcast, okay? We're not interviewing people. We're not even introducing people. We're just saying their name and then getting to the ideas, because that's what we do on this pod. But I have to give a small introduction to one of my favorite people on the planet. His name is Wang Yip. Now, I know we're not supposed to introduce anybody on the pod, but Wang Yip is actually somebody that I've started doing podcasts with. We actually had a podcast called The Dip, The Remix, and so he is the OG, one of my original collaborators when it comes to a podcast. He's a 7-time author. Just a brilliant mind. And in fact, if I think about dangerous ideas and the person that has the most dangerous ideas per sentence, it's Wang Yip. Wang, thank you so much for being on Dangerous Ideas.
Wow, that's quite an intro to
hold the mic up. You gotta hold up.
Quite an intro to live up to.
Well, listen, I'm trying to think about somebody that has more dangerous ideas than you, and
it's
really,
you, Shawn.
Well, no, I'm
got the Dangerous Ideas podcast, right?
I'm embarrassed because I actually think it's you. And the reason why I love chatting with you is because I don't think that there's another human on the planet that's able, like, your superpower is the ability to distill all this information, whether it's through books. I mean, you're a rabid reader. Is it rabid? I don't know. But
sure, yeah.
And voracious reader. You listen to everything, you read everything, and then you're able to take all those ideas and to distill it down to a point, to an idea, a concept, a framework that will change someone's life. And you do that in your newsletters, you do that in your writing. It's incredible. So I just want to give you your flowers here.
Thank you.
And
yes,
part of the inspiration of doing this Dangerous Ideas is, things that we've been talking about throughout the years, which have been dangerous ideas. And now here we are on video. I mean, it looks good.
Well, you look good. I don't know about me.
No, you look great. I want to get into some of the dangerous ideas just to start.
Sure. Yeah.
And pick your brain on some of the dangerous ideas that you've been writing about for years, and want to see why you think it's so dangerous. So the first one that I want to bring up, is skipping the line.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to give you why I love the idea of skipping the line, but first I want you to describe to the audience, what does skipping the line mean?
Yeah, it's an idea from James Altucher's book. It's Skip the Line, and he talks about how there's this set path with everything that you do. So let's just say, as an example, investment banking. You go to school, maybe it's a bit, you go to get a business degree, you need to get your MBA, you need to major it or specialize in like financial, whatever, accounting. You need to kind of go through the rounds, maybe do internships, things like that, and then you get into investment banking, right? That's the kind of traditional routes. Now, James Altucher's point is you can skip the line with any sort of path. You just have to kind of work hard enough. And the reason that he's trying to advocate, and maybe why you love it so much, is you don't have to follow the traditional path, right? You don't have to spend all that time. You can shortcut your way essentially into whatever career, whatever path you want, right? And so, investment banking is maybe not the best example because I'm not an investment banker, but maybe instead of doing the traditional route, you are the one raising funds, right? You go and talk to, your fellow classmates from school, and you say, hey, like I'm thinking about investment banking. I'm gonna, whatever. I'm gonna do a hedge fund or do some algorithms or whatever.
Is there an individual that you think that has skipped the line? Give me an example of somebody that maybe someone would know around how they would skip the line.
Yeah, I know this. Really, really interesting individual. Used to be in management consulting, did a lot of different like speeches here and there, asked me for advice around how to get into professional speaking. I think, but I don't know for sure because I didn't really track his career. But I think he started doing a lot of free stuff at first. right? And just doing a lot of speaking, taking whatever opportunities there were. And then, all of a sudden it just kind of turned around and there he was, he left management consulting and, became the hottest speaker really on the planet, right? I mean, I think you know who I'm talking about.
Oh, I appreciate the kudos. No, I appreciate.
If that's not skipping the line, I mean, I can't think of a better example.
I'll tell you, I did skip the line. And because there is a traditional path to public speaking and becoming a keynote speaker and to being, one of the book speakers in the world. I think there is a linear path to getting there, but the way that I think my skip the line was through content, was through video content, putting out video content. That's how I skipped the line. Like, I was able to create my own lane, and I was able to get in there. So I appreciate the flowers on that. To me, like, I love the idea of skipping the line, and I love that you've written about this a ton. And one of my favorite examples is not a popular example, but I will describe it as skip the line is like going to a club. Imagine you're getting into a club, you're lining up, and there's a bouncer at the front. Now, most people can get through the line, if they just wait their turn, and they'll get into the club. But every club has a back door, and there are certain people that are able to get through the back door because maybe they're good looking, maybe they're famous, maybe they come up with some way of getting through the back door. To me, that's part of skipping the line. Some people break down the door and they get to the DJ booth like right away, and they do that through really innovative ways. One of my favorite people to skip the line, he's not a popular person, but it's Jake Paul and Logan Paul when it comes to boxing. So you think about boxing. Boxing is a sport where you have to pay your dues. Boxing is a sport where you have to wait your turn. You have to fight a number of different individuals. You have to go through the amateur ranks, then you get to the pro ranks, and then you can be at the main stage, like headliner, in the arena, in the stadium. But what Jake Paul and Logan Paul did was they created their own path through content, through video content, by building their social media following. They were able to completely skip the line, barge through the door, get to the main stage, DJ booth, fight Floyd Mayweather, get some of the biggest boxing matches that's happened over the years simply by skipping the line, and they did that through content. Such an amazing way of an example of skipping the line that I love sort of to use. But I want to ask you, one of the things that James Altucher talks about, and you've written about as well, which I love, which is his advice against going against the 10,000 hour realm. 10,000 hours is putting in your dues. 10,000 hours is like going through this linear route. Talk to me about what James Altucher talks about.
Yeah. So he talks about this intersection of skills. So putting 10,000 hours into, let's say one field, one skill, that'll put you at the top of that field. But if you look at the intersection of multiple skills or multiple fields, you don't need to put in 10,000 hours in each field, right? Instead, you can put in 1,000 hours, right? And do the, lots of mathematics here, 80-20 and all that kind of stuff. But what he's saying is you want to be in the top 1% in 2 skills, you just need to put in 1,000 hours in each. Or if it's 3 or more skills, maybe it's 100 hours in each of those set of skills. So by kind of finding that intersection, finding your sweet spot of different skills, you don't need to put in that 10,000 hours.
So give me an example of somebody putting in 1,000 hours in something, one skill, and putting 1,000 hours in another skill, combining those things together. I think you call it the multiplier effect or multiplier skills. Give me an example of that.
Yeah, sure. So, let's just say, and actually there's another idea that James talks about, which I really like, which is you can borrow hours from other things that you've worked on.
Right.
So, let's just use management consulting as an example. Management consulting, we work on decks and reports and things like that. That is all translatable into content building, right? You could build content from that set of skills. So you could take those hours from management consulting, you can put in 1,000 hours, and then the other 1,000 hours, it could come from, let's say, your immersion in culture, in entertainment. Maybe you spend, I don't know, 1,000 hours analyzing Netflix movies for virality.
Yeah.
Right. So you could take those 1,000 hours, you could take your 1,000 hours from management consulting and building content, you combine the two, and then you become, number one speaker on planet or whatever it is, right? Around edutainment or whatever the niche is. So you could take those 1,000 hours from each of those different areas, and again combine those. And because you're at that intersection, other people can't really compete with you, right? Because they need to also put in the 1,000 hours in each of those different skills, right?
Right.
And if you want to, of course, niche down and try to become again the top 1%, you just need to add a few more skills or a few more areas or topics.
And this is a way for you to skip the line.
Absolutely.
Is to create another tangential skill, combine those things, and then you will help skip the line. So love the idea of skipping the line because I think it's a story of disruption, right? It's not going through the traditional route. So I love that.
And the other thing about skipping the line, I'll just add here, and what James points out as well, which I think is relevant here, is most people will take the traditional route. And very few people will look for alternative ways to get around that.
Right.
Right. Like if you want to be an investment banker, you're not gonna go out to other students and try to raise funds. Nobody does that. But because nobody does that, it gives you that really nice competitive advantage. But also, nobody else is competing with you.
Right.
Right. Because you're finding creative ways around it.
Right.
So that's another reason why you might want to skip the line.
The other thing that I think. This is a radical idea. This is why it's called Dangerous Ideas. I was recently listening to an interview with Mr. Beast.
Okay.
And Mr. Beast said there's this rule with 10,000 hours that everyone seems to follow. In fact, I think Malcolm Gladwell says, I said 10,000 hours, but people misinterpreted what that means, right?
Yeah.
But Mr. Beast says you should spend 10,000 days at something. Mr. Beast is taking this, he's already put in his 10,000 hours. To be a master at it, you have to spend like decades putting in the work to be a true master, which I really love. Mm-hmm. I also love the idea of taking beyond that, which is taking 10,000 experiments. So we're talking about something even greater than 10,000 hours. But let me get your hot take on Mr. Beast's 10,000 days at something.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, we could analyze Mr. Beast for days, I'm sure. But there's a lot of things that Mr. Beast does that obviously add to his popularity, right? He continually invests in himself, right? I think if you watch his first few videos, and I'm not sure if you have, right?
I have.
He's talked about his vision, right? He's talked about how, and I think in interviews as well, he's talked about how every single dollar or every single cent that he's earned from his channel, basically he just reinvests into either new equipment or new skills or people or whatever, just makes it bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think it's it's obviously yes, 10,000 days, great, right? And that's a great let's say barometer of mastery. But you also need these other things too, right? You need to continually reinvest. You need to you can't just spend 10,000 hours playing one key on a piano and think I'm gonna be a piano master, right? You need to get that feedback. You need to continually push yourself outside of your comfort zone, right? And so I think the idea behind the 10,000 days is give yourself enough time so that you can practice, you can get that feedback, you can work on it, you can continually improve, right? There's a book that I recently read. It's called Same as Ever by Morgan Housel. He wrote The Psychology of Money. And in his book, one of his ideas is about how everything good in life comes from compounding. So you need to give yourself enough time, and one of the ideas I think we're gonna hopefully talk about, the 1% better every day, right? Give yourself enough time for that 1% to compound into something amazing, right?
Yeah.
Because 1% over one day, not a lot. 1% over 365 days, a lot, right?
Well, it's part of the reason why your newsletter, I know LinkedIn, is called 1% Better.
Yeah.
And was that the idea? Is that being 1% better every single day that's a compounding effect. Okay,
yes.
got it.
Yeah. And I also wanted to be a little bit maybe conservative because I was thinking like, everybody kind of maybe promises like 10% or 100% better or 10 times better or whatever.
10x better.
Yeah, whatever it is, right? And so I wanted to focus on basically really interesting, really simple ideas that you can implement at work. That and everybody's busy, right? Not everyone's gonna go out and do all of these things all at once, but I wanted to kind of get that cadence in going for everyone, for my audience, get them to think about things a little bit differently, and just do something small. Just do something, some small improvement, some small change at work, to hopefully make it 1% better. And when they kind of see that, and when that compounds, then they will see massive growth.
I never asked you because I think Essential Habits, your sixth book or fifth book, I think, or sixth book. It was your sixth book. It came out before Atomic Habits, and right? It came out before Atomic. I believe it did. I don't know.
I think maybe around the same time.
Are you?
Yeah.
And Atomic Habits, it has been like the number one book for the last. Yeah. And I feel like Essential Habits. I mean, I don't want to gas you up too much, but like I think that's a better book, and it's actually, I think it's 500 pages more than Atomic Habits. What's your opinion? I know this wasn't on, like, what's your opinion on Atomic Habits and its comparison to Essential Habits?
Yeah, well, honestly, I think they're different books, and my book is I wrote it purposely to be more practical, right? To actually get into the weeds of like what do we need to do, right, every single day or month or whatever it is. And whereas Atomic Habits is more at a higher level, right? How do you form really good habits, and how do you break bad habits, right? And so, of course, the other major difference is James Clear has been writing for a very long time, right? And building up this email list, and I have not been doing that. So when he went to sell this book, it became an instant, right? Bestseller,
right?
Because he's already had an audience,
right?
And so a lot of it is, you can have the best ideas in the world, but if you don't have the marketing and all that kind of stuff behind it, and no one knows about it, well, it doesn't get anywhere.
Right.
So
we can talk about that later too.
Yeah.
But okay, let's go to another dangerous idea.
Sure. Yeah.
Which I've never heard of, but I absolutely agree in, which is the idea of practicing tragic optimism. Practicing tragic optimism. Can you tell the audience what does that mean?
Sure. Yeah. So tragic optimism, it's a concept from Brad Stulberg's book Master of Change, and he talks about how to embrace change, because everything, the only common kind of denominator in life is change. How do you embrace change when everything around you is changing, but you're also changing yourself, right? And he looked at studies, he looked at research, and he found that tragic optimism, the people that practice tragic optimism seem to have kind of the best outlook in life. So one of the examples that he gave was, and I'm trying to like remember all the details. There's, I think this gentleman named James.
He's a prisoner. He's a prisoner of war.
Yeah, I think in Vietnam, I think it was. And so they were interviewing him after he had got out of Vietnam, and they said, what was your outlook like in prison, right? Like, you're a prisoner of war. Were you optimistic that you were going to get out? Were you pessimistic?
Yeah.
Like, what was that like, right? Like, did it help that and there was other prisoners of war as well? And he was, asking James, other prisoners, they were optimistic, what happened to them? And he said that the prisoners that basically lost hope first were the ones that were optimistic, because they were basically.
Let me remind what he said. The optimistic people, they didn't survive.
Yeah, they lost hope. The reason is because they were optimistic that they would get out by
sooner,
Christmas,
right?
By Thanksgiving, right? They had these dates in mind. They were like, "Oh, I'm gonna get out. Everything's gonna be great." And then when that didn't happen, right? It continually didn't happen, that they didn't get out. They started to lose that hope because they were so optimistic. So James at Stockdale, instead, he said, actually, the people that were optimistic and you can't just be completely negative. You're optimistic that you're going to get out, but you're also realistic
Right.
about what that chance looks like, right? And so that's tragic optimism, which is, yes, being positive, but at the same time being realistic, being feasible about what this actually means. Right?
I absolutely love this because I've been going off about this on our pods. I think the two constants in the pod is, number one, I think Mr. Beast is dropped in every episode.
Sure.
Number two, we've been talking about how we need to embrace hard things. We've lost this ability to struggle, to do difficult things. And the reason why I love this dangerous idea around practicing tragic optimism, it's recognizing that the path is going to be hard.
Yes.
And that you are going to struggle, but still being optimistic going through the struggle. It's like going through the darkness, knowing that it's hard, but just like knowing that it's going to be okay, but just knowing that it's going to be hard.
Yeah.
And I when you wrote this, I was trying to think about other parts of my life that are like, I know it's going to be hard, but I'm going to enjoy it. Which is, number one, I think about my kids, right?
Sure.
Having kids, as you know, like it's like, you know it's going to be hard, but you're happy to be with them. You know everything's gonna go well, but there's gonna be dents around through the road.
Yeah.
Same thing with working out. Every time I go to a workout, I'm like,
Yeah.
damn, this is gonna be hard.
Yeah.
But you enjoy the process, and you're optimistic around the outcomes out of it. So, are there any parts of your life where you're thinking where you've practiced tragic optimism?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that really immediately comes up to mind is my career. A lot of the time,
Right.
I think,
Yeah. No, this is good. Okay.
Yeah, no, I think about a lot of the times, like, hey, like, and your last podcast, you talked about status, right? And
Yes.
like getting kind of those fancy titles. Like, I mean, I don't really care about that kind of stuff, but then everybody kind of gets into that comparison, right?
Yeah.
Like, I remember this at Deloitte. I'm not going to name any names, but I remember different individuals actually coming to me and going, and actually talking about you, Shawn, but other people as well. And they're saying things like, oh, Shawn's like only he's only 32 years old and he's senior manager already or something like that. Like, and promotions would come up and people would go, oh, this guy got promoted, but I didn't get promoted and I'm older than him and I've got more experience. And so you get into these comparisons. And so, yeah, absolutely. I have the same trap. I'm in that same trap.
I was in the trap too.
Yeah.
I think once you're in the bubble, you get into that trap.
Yeah.
And,
you just can't help. Yeah.
But tell me, but what about the tragic optimism? So why are you mentioning this idea of status with tragic optimism?
Yeah. So what I'm thinking about now is, I'm being realistic, right? And so optimistically, should I be in a farther spot? Maybe. I could have pointed at several things in my life, in my past, that I could have been, more aggressive on or negotiated harder or whatever. But I'm also thinking like, hey, like, yeah, work is not that terrible. And, but, I also have the freedom and the life work balance to be with my son, to be with my wife as well, and be with family. And, being realistic about where I'm going to end up. Like, am I actually going to end up as a CEO somewhere? I mean, yeah, it could still happen, but realistically, probably not at this point in my career. So yeah, just being realistic about all these things, right? Being realistic about like where your career should be and where your career is right now, right? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to grapple with right now. Is,
okay.
Should I be farther in my life? Possibly, but am I pretty far already?
But can I just push back on that?
Sure, yeah. Please.
Doesn't everybody say that because they're comparing themselves to others? Isn't everyone saying, "Oh man, like I'm 24 years old, like how come I don't have a boat yet? Like I don't have a aren't we? What do you compare? You're saying like I'm not farther along, and I know everybody says that.
Yeah.
But are you comparing that to something else that you've seen, or is that like internal? I don't know.
Yeah, it's a combination of both, I would say, right?
Okay.
Because a lot of the times internally you can kind of. I mean, I'm an ambitious person by nature, so
yep.
I think that, of course. But also, you don't have those guideposts, right? And so you don't really know, like, and everybody's situation is obviously different, right? At my point in my career, with my experience, with my skills, you can't help but kind of go, okay, well, who else kind of has a similar skill set, similar experience, and where are they in their life, right? And they're way farther ahead, and so I feel like I should be farther ahead, right? Or you I don't know, you compare yourself to someone that maybe has less skills or less experience than you have, and they're farther ahead, and you go, well, why am I not farther ahead, right? And so, I mean, I have a both. Yeah, I have a bit of both, right? I have this internal push to do better, of course, which I think is healthy, right?
Yep.
But at the same time, I also have this external kind of, hey, I
And
look
maybe
at
that's
other
something
people.
that we can't escape as human beings.
Sure, yeah,
because
yeah.
we're just surrounded by things and people around us, right? And maybe that's something that we can't escape.
Yeah, I don't think you can, maybe you can't escape it. I don't know. I can't really say, but what I think is it can be healthy or unhealthy, right? If you have this obsession over it, if you feel like you need to sacrifice different things, your life balance, your family, whatever it is, your relationships, that's not healthy, right? But using it as a guidepost, I think,
Right.
can be a good way of going, hey, maybe I should be farther in my life, or maybe I should negotiate harder or be a little bit more aggressive.
Okay.
So,
Okay. No,
yeah.
and that's a balanced response.
Yeah.
On this note on status, one of the things that you write about is the idea of identity shifting at work. Identity shifting at work. I love this concept. I think Brad Stulberg, I think he writes about it in Master of Change.
Yes.
I haven't read Master of Change.
That's okay.
But
Yeah.
actually, he has an amazing story in that book about a speed skater, which is probably my favorite story in the world. Just to summarize, is that this speed skater, I think from Norway, he became like the fastest skater in his particular race. And the way that he did that in the Olympics is not by training harder, but by like going for beers with his friends at night, or just getting away from this grind and the hustle. And it was the idea that once he stepped away from his identity of becoming like the greatest speed skater, it allowed him to adopt different identities and allowed him to excel in his. I gotta.
Yeah, so this long list. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So you write about this, and it might be separate, but you write about the idea of identity shifting at work. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, you actually talk about this on the last episode about shifting from a keynote speaker to being a podcaster, an author, consultant, whatever, a founder. So at work, we all have these identities, right? And we attach these identities to sometimes our titles, sometimes the things that we do at work. I'm a project manager or whatever, or I'm a founder or CEO, and like you said, it's devastating when you lose that status, when you lose that title. And so this idea of shifting your identity at work is interesting to me, because it means that you're not just a project manager or CEO, right?
Yeah.
You're also a father. Maybe you're also a podcaster. Maybe you're also a marathon runner, whatever it is, right? And so when you have these multiple identities, you can sort of shift your identities as needed, so that when kind of one identity is maybe
sunsetting,
or failing, or you're moving out of it into something else, it's not like your whole identity kind of crumbles because I used to be CEO and now I'm whatever it is, now I'm just a father, right? Or I'm not saying that being a father isn't worthwhile, right? But some people kind of do that, right? They have this whole value attached to their identity, and then when that identity goes away, they lose meaning, right? They lose this purpose in life. So, having these multiple identities really helps you transition with different changes that happen in your life.
So you are advocating for people to be schizophrenic, or to be bipolar in a sense, because I agree with it, but just having these different identities so that you can shift when something is sunsetting.
Yeah, I think it's about. I mean, schizophrenic might be like more extreme. I think what Brad is trying to say, and what I'm trying to advocate for, I think, is it's okay to have different things, right? And not attach your whole identity to kind of one title or one job or one role or whatever, right? Do different things, explore where your passions are, and master that craft and go and do that thing, do the best you can, and have these multiple identities that you identify with that you can then transition to if you need to during change, right?
And I love this idea because I believe that the reason why it's important to create different identities is to avoid the status trap, right? Because as I mentioned in the last podcast, if you were able to listen to it, or a couple podcasts ago, what I talked about is that as human beings, the thing that we hate the most, more than death itself, is to move back in status. To lose your status, like to go from number 1 to number 2 is what we fear the most. And so the reason why practicing different identities is your ability to actually go down in status. Like practicing the ability to go down in status is actually a superpower because it allows you to be okay with other people looking at you as not as the top dog in your particular field. So really important. Okay.
Yeah. So here's a dangerous idea. Okay. For you, every single year, do something completely new. Become a beginner, right?
Yep.
Get that beginner's mindset.
Love that.
Because that beginner's mindset will help you in other fields, right?
Listen, we're coming up to 2024. That might be the most dangerous idea yet.
Maybe.
And I love that. And I've been trying to do that as well, which is trying something fundamentally new. Like for me, the book was new. We launched a special was new. We're going to be delving into more like the entertainment realm, next year. So like just trying something new so that your identity shifts to zero. You're literally at zero. You're like, okay, I'm like a beginner at this.
Yeah,
how do I solve this problem to get to 100?
Yeah.
So I love that idea.
Yeah.
Okay, let's get to the next dangerous idea. Love this idea, which is the pre-mortem. The pre-mortem. Now, we all know what a post-mortem is.
Sure, yeah.
When you're done something, you figure out what went well, what went wrong. You discuss as a team. Hopefully you learn something about it. So on the next project, the next idea, next thing, that you don't repeat the same failures that you had in the last project. But what's a pre-mortem?
Yeah. It's where you basically do all the things in the post-mortem, but before that project or that activity has happened, right? And the value of the exercise comes from obviously the pre-mortem, you can do something about it, right? Whereas the post-mortem, if someone's died and you said, they probably should have got whatever the medicine earlier, you can't do anything about it. So the pre-mortem is a fantastic exercise. I mean, I use it mostly on projects, but I mean, you can apply it to every endeavor that you take on in your career, your personal life. You just have to ask yourself sort of Murphy's Law, like what is going to go wrong and what can I do about it now so that I can prevent or mitigate or, try to reduce the damage that's going to happen, right? And so when you do that exercise, in a sort of safe environment as well, which is really interesting, right? Because, post-mortem, if the project's completely gone off the rails, basically you're looking for people to blame, right? In a corporate environment. So people aren't going to be upfront about, I made this mistake or it was my responsibility to do X, Y, Z, whatever. A pre-mortem, nothing has happened yet, right? And so people generally feel safer to kind of go, hey, this might happen, or like I see this being a risk. It's not something that has happened. It's not something they need to take responsibility for, but it's something that you can address and identify early on so you can figure out what to do later.
Love this idea of pre-mortem. I think you mentioned Morgan Housel. I believe in his new book, what he does mention is that risk is when you've actually thought of everything. You've crossed your T's, you dotted your I's. Risk is everything that happens after you've thought of everything.
Yeah.
That's what risk really is.
Yeah.
So pre-mortem is essentially that.
Yeah.
Pre-mortem is figuring out, okay, you've thought of everything. Now the real risk is the things that you didn't actually talk about.
Yeah.
So I love this idea of a pre-mortem, and I think we should do a pre-mortem not only at work, not only in business, but we should do a pre-mortem before you get married.
Oh, yeah.
Before you have a trip, before you, have a game, you should do a pre-mortem. You talk to your potential partner. your wife, your husband, whoever, be like, hey, what's everything that could go wrong? You're like, well, your mother-in-law could be, a bitch. You might spend too much money on this. It's a great idea. Pre-mortem to everything.
Yeah.
How is something going to go wrong with everything?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if I would put it as a pre-mortem, but you could talk about, let's just use marriage as an example. Like, what are you going to be like at, in the worst scenario, right? In the worst case scenario, right? In terms of like, you're hungry, you're angry, something's happened at work. What are you going to be like, right? And talking about those things ahead of time in a safe environment, so that when you go to those situations, you know exactly what to do, right? Like, if your partner's not feeling well, you've talked about it ahead of time about how you can, like, what you can do or what you shouldn't do in order to make her feel better, right? Or make your partner feel better. So,
I think one of the beautiful things about doing a pre-mortem, is that actually it might lower your expectations, because you're already assessing sort of those risks, so that when something does happen that's unexpected, you're like, wow, this is way better than I ever imagined, which is what innovation is about. It's like, innovation is not about what if, because people don't want to innovate because they always ask the question, what if this doesn't work out? But I think the question that we should be asking is, what if this works out way better than we ever imagined?
Yes.
And I think one of the pre-mortems is actually keeping your expectations low, so when that does happen, you're like pleasantly surprised.
Risk is often seen as something very negative, but there are positive risks, as you've pointed out, right?
Yeah.
There are things where something has happened and actually turns out better than you expected, right?
Love that.
I'm surprised that people ask about innovation and risk, and of course there's a tie in there, right? But I mean, my stance has always been, and the way that I've kind of thought about, writing and my career and things like that, is if I'm continually learning, if I'm continually building on my experience, like, I'll never lose.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Yeah.
Because you also talk about having an anti-fragile career. I think it's Nassim Taleb who talked about Anti-Fragile, one of the most popular books of all time. What do you mean by an anti-fragile career? And maybe that's what you're talking about, is like perpetually learning. Tell me what it means.
Yeah, let's talk about and maybe let's define what anti-fragile means first. So in his book, Anti-Fragile, Nassim Taleb talks about robustness. So if something is robust, it means like it can't really, it's resisting and it keeps its shape and things like that. And then he asks the question, what is the opposite of robust? And the opposite of robust is, I think it's fragility. And then he asks the subsequent question, what is the opposite of fragility? It's not necessarily robustness, because robustness is the resistance, right, of an object. Actually, the opposite of fragility is anti-fragility, which is something breaks but actually becomes stronger when it then reforms, right? And so the anti-fragile career, what it means is, and I'll share the story of actually a story from his book about two workers. One is a knowledge worker and the other is a taxi driver. So the knowledge worker has a stable career. They get a paycheck every 2 weeks. They get benefits, all that stuff. Things kind of move along for the knowledge worker. Everything's great. The taxi driver sometimes has fares. Sometimes it's busy, right? Oilers are playing. Lots of people going to the airport. Lots of tourists coming in. And then there are times where it's not that busy, right? People aren't going to do keynote speeches and things like that at the airport, whatever. So they're not booking a lot of taxi rides. So their monthly income, if you kind of graft it out, the knowledge worker is pretty stable, and then the taxi driver's kind of peaks and valleys, right? Some months super busy, other months not that busy. At the end of the year, though, they both earn, let's just say, $50,000, right? Both of them take away $50,000 in annual salary. Now, for the knowledge worker, if that individual gets fired, let go, could be any reason, right? Like these days, you can have any reason why you're going to get let go. Could be economy, could be whatever, COVID. This knowledge worker gets let go. They don't have the skills to handle those valleys, right? Because they've kind of they're getting used to this paycheck, right? The taxi driver, though, he goes through a couple months of drought of not getting fares, it's okay. He's already been through that kind of stuff, right? So the taxi driver's career is anti-fragile because he can survive these kind of big collapses in in his career. Whereas the knowledge worker, his career is more fragile because he gets let go. He needs to go back to applying to jobs. Maybe he needs to go back to school. Maybe he doesn't get back the same job that he got, right? That he had before. So, and this is all leading to this anti-fragile career. So
right.
A little
Until
bit.
Uber comes and it disrupts the taxi driver. No,
yeah. So there's a little bit longer. So my point is, and what I write about is, how do you develop an anti-fragile career? How do you develop a career where sometimes change happens, right? You can't control it. Yeah. Sometimes you get let go and you have no control over it, right? So how do you make sure that your career is anti-fragile in the sense that if you get let go, if you had to change your income, whatever, change your job, you still survive? And so one of the things that I write about is continually learning, continually developing your skills, right? And making sure that whatever you're doing, whatever project, activity, role you're taking on, you're learning something new, you're developing connections with a network, a new network, whatever, and you're just like building out that personal capital, right? That career capital that you have, so that if something happens to you, you can rely on that career capital to kind of keep you going, right?
So I love the idea of anti-fragile career. I've never heard somebody, speak about it in that way. I believe that one of the best ways of creating, correct me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Because it's the first time I'm hearing about this idea of anti-fragile career. That's why it's a dangerous idea. I believe that by developing your own brand equity, whether it's through creating your own IP, building your relationships, putting out content in the world, is the absolute best way of creating an anti-fragile career. Because by building brand equity, you're not beholden to a particular industry, a boss, organization. You're building your own IP and your own brand equity. So no matter where you go, you will always be relevant. I'll give you an example.
Sure.
I remember when we were at the firm, there was a partner that was let go that I was close with. And he'd built his entire knowledge base, his entire career around a particular field. And when he was let go on the street, I thought he would have picked something up right away because at the firm he was known in a particular field.
Sure, yeah.
But when he was on the street, people did not know him. And that was a click for me to be like, oh, wait, listen. The broader market does not know who he is because he did not build his own brand equity. He gave all his brand equity to the firm. People didn't know who he was. They knew what the firm was. And so that was a light bulb for me to be like, wait, the safest job that you can build in the world, the most anti-fragile thing that you can do is to build your own brand equity. Now, am I conflating the terms, or is this part of your thesis?
No, definitely part of the thesis, right? Is the building your brand equity. I mean, I would agree. I think building your own IP, building your own skills, your content, all that stuff is stuff that no one can take away from you, right? And that's really what I think the anti-fragile career is, right? Is trying to build in things that nobody can take away from you, right? Because,
for example, you're writing, right?
Yeah.
Writing 7 books, writing consistently over time, that's not beholden to any organization. That's you at the end of the day. So no matter what happens, you have a following, you have a brand that you've built around your writing and your public speaking skills. So that's in a sense created yourself, an anti-fragile career.
Yeah.
Would you say that you have an anti-fragile career?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few more things that I would do to build an even more anti-fragile career. But yeah, it's getting there.
Compounding.
Yeah.
We're all compounding.
Yeah.
Now, this leads me to my one of the most dangerous ideas ever said on the pod, which is the Wang Yip effect. Okay, the Wang Yip effect.
Yes, I saw this. I saw this in our email conversations, but I actually don't know what this is.
Yeah, the Wang Yip effect is putting in the work every single day to be known as prolific. Being prolific is something that I aspire to, what many people aspire to, but very few people can call themselves prolific. Prolific is someone that no matter what, they put in the work and they show up and they ship.
Yeah.
I swear to God that, especially in the world of content creation, very few people have the Wang Yip effect, which is showing up every single day. I think when I think of prolific, I think of you. I think of Seth Godin, who writes every single day as a blog.
Yep.
And I don't know, maybe I think of Jason Calacanis, who's a great podcaster, This Week in Startups, producing pods every single day for All In, for This Week in Startups. Very, very difficult to do. What is the secret to being prolific? What is the secret to being prolific?
What is the secret?
Because you have not taken a sick day. You have not taken a sick month, a sick day. You've always put in the work. How? Everyone wants to know the Wang Yip effect.
I don't know. There isn't a secret. I don't think. There's no shortcut to hard work, right? Like you gotta put in the work. If you know that there is no shortcut, and for me, I recognize that early on. There's no shortcut to like great writing. You gotta write, right? You can't be a great singer without singing. You can't be a great speaker without speaking, right? So you got to put in the work. And so if you need to put in the 10,000 hours, 10,000 experiments, 10,000 days, right? Start right away.
It's not just work, though. It cannot be work. There's a lot of people that are hardworking. I don't know. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to figure out why you're so prolific.
I think, so when you get into this, so this is really interesting. When I first started out, though, trying to be prolific, which I would argue that I'm not, but
no.
Putting in the work every day, you know, it's hard. You get, like, for writers, there's this idea called writer's block. You know, I'd get blocked all the time, right? But when you put in the work every single day, when you show up at your desk, so, you know, I think the fortunes, fate, whatever you want to call it, they smile upon you. They recognize, okay, yes, like, you know, Wang shows up every single day. Like, we need to reward him with an idea or with a concept or with something, right? And so you when you put in the work, luck seems to just favor you, right? You seem to have all the luck in the world because you've put in the work. If you don't put in any work, I mean, you could still get lucky, but your luck surface area is not as big, right? So yeah, you just got to put in the work.
But you have to also love what you are doing. Like, to be a prolific writer, you have to love it, no?
I think you have to love it, or you have to love some aspect of it, right? And focus on that. Like, what I love, I mean, I like reading. I don't love it because it's like a hard activity that I have to kind of do. But what I do love is sharing that knowledge, right? In order to get to that point of sharing the knowledge, I mean, I obviously have to get through those, right? Reading and writing and all that kind of stuff.
Do you love sharing or do you love writing more?
I love sharing more.
Okay.
Yeah.
You love sharing the ideas out.
I do, yeah.
And, okay.
Yeah. Writing is tough. You know.
Of course.
You know this. Yeah. Writing's tough. I could write forever. I could edit forever and still not have the perfect article. But of course, you've got a deadline. You got to ship. Nothing happens until you actually ship it.
Right? Where is the dopamine coming from you? Is it the comments, the love of seeing your share? Is it hitting the publish button? I'm trying to figure out how do I become more prolific. So I'm trying to get where can I get more of that dopamine?
Yeah, I think it's two things. So it's one is it's that sharing. So when I hit the publish button, I feel good about myself. Comments and things like that's all external. Like, I can't control any of that stuff, right? And so attaching. So I learned early on attaching kind of my identity or my popularity or my status with likes and comments is not healthy, because then you're always just chasing for things, right? And so I want to write timeless content. I want to write stuff that's built for me, right? And that's kind of where the dopamine hit is, right? That second part is it's something for me, right? Something for my future self. If it doesn't benefit anyone else except me, I'm still happy, right? And so, yeah, so I go through this process of writing. I go through this process of learning, sharing what I've learned. But really, it's about learning for myself, right? And trying to absorb this stuff from the books and trying to implement it.
And at the end of the day, it's going back to what, we talked about being 1% better. This allows you to be 1% better.
Yeah. It's just thinking about these ideas, reflecting on them, sharing them. And if other people get it, get something out of it, that's great. But really, it's for me, right?
Yeah. On our last pod, I was talking to Navin, my friend. I asked him what his top 5 like content recommendations are. Top 5 books. I think it was top 3, top 5. But
okay.
You're such a voracious reader. You read like 100 books a year. Give me your top 5 books that you can recommend to the audience in terms of being better, being 1% better, other than Essential Habits.
Okay. Yeah. It's a little bit difficult, because usually when I'm recommending books, people will have something in mind. So, I would just say that my favorite books are, I like Choose Yourself from James Altucher. Yeah. He's the one that book was the one that really set me on the path to like doing this daily practice of health and wealth and wisdom and things like that. Choose Yourself is great. The Practice by Seth Godin. Amazing. Yeah. Amazing book. That book is really, it talks to me at least about this idea of putting in the work, right?
Yeah.
Doing it every single day.
Crazy, because we interviewed Seth Godin together.
We did. Yeah. And Seth Godin's amazing. Obviously, does tons and tons of things. Yeah. So The Practice, Choose Yourself, and yeah, I think about just some books. So have you heard of the Lindy Effect?
Yes,
you heard
of course.
That? Yeah. So books that are things that are popular for X number of years are still popular.
Yes.
X more number of years. Yeah.
The Bible is the most Lindy book on the planet.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah. No, I'm talking about some really, really classical books, Seven Habits of Highly Effective People,
yes.
Stephen Covey, right? I like to go back to that book. Even though I know the 7 habits, even though I try to practice, of course, the 7 habits, I still go back to the book, just because every time you reread a book, you get something new out of it, right? And so I try to reread the book every couple of months, just to make sure that I'm getting kind of the most out of the book, right? You're spending $20 on a book, so you might as well get the full value out of the book, right? So, yeah,
great recommendations, fantastic recommendations. Listen, I think the last question I have for you, because we're coming up with time here,
sure,
is any advice that you can give for me? You've we've worked together at Deloitte for many years. Co-collaborators on podcasts. Now we see each other because our kids are in the same daycare.
Yeah.
Give me some advice that I can take into 2024.
I don't know if I can give you any advice. Like I said, like with the book recommendations, people usually have things like, is there a specific area that you'd like me to comment on?
Because you're such a voracious reader, I think I'm always trying to get better, but to me it's like, how do I be more, how do I take even bigger risks? Like, to me, the bold ones was about stepping into the unknown and just doing that with fear. Like, it's about taking a different path. Mm-hmm. It's not necessarily like leaping, right? It's not necessarily about like, just like being courageous at the end of the day. That's not what boldness is all about. But maybe the next book will be about courageous. But I have to feel that. To me, the boldness is about doing something different. Give me something about courage.
Well, the thing is, I think you're in a really good spot, Shawn. Obviously you're a hot speaker. You got this like stable kind of base, right? You got a nice family,
Minivan.
amazing studio. Yeah, you got the Sienna and the Highlander. So you got the stable base, and you can take a bigger risk if you wanted to, right? I think most people, though, most entrepreneurs, when they say they take a risk, it's not an actual risk. They've calculated it out. They've done maybe the pre-mortem. They've figured it out, and they've, Tim Ferriss has that fear setting exercise. Have you seen that on YouTube?
Didn't he talk about that on his TED?
His TED Talk. Yeah. Okay. So he talks about this fear setting exercise of listing out your fears.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Right? And then after you've listed out the fear, if this happened, what would I do, or what could I do in order to, let's just say you take a risk, right? You wanted to start a production company making films, right? Making videos.
Which we're doing, but yeah.
Yeah. So let's just say hypothetically there's a 1% chance it might not work. In that 1% chance it doesn't go well, maybe, I don't know.
1% chance, I got 99% chance, but yeah.
Yeah. So I'm putting it high hopes on you. So 1% chance it doesn't work. Whatever, the worst case thing happens. The studio goes bankrupt. You get sued because you're quoting Mr. Beast and Mr. Beast comes find you. I don't know, whatever, right? Something happens. What can you do in that scenario, right? You do the pre-mortem. You kind of, okay, here's a fear. How likely is this actually going to happen? What is the impact, right? You do kind of that risk, the risk mitigation that all PMs kind of do. What is the likelihood this is going to happen? What is the impact this kind of? What can I do to actually, if this happened, what could I do to kind of get back, right? You still got the speaking gigs. You still got this amazing studio. You still got an amazing producer that's working with you.
She is amazing, yes.
Right? So you've got all of these things still, right? So you could just build it back up and start another production company, right? Like it's like that fear, that risk is not actually what you have in your head, right? So sometimes I think we go into these things, maybe even these companies, they're asking about innovation and risk. They have this idea in their head of, oh, this is going to definitely fail, or this has an 80% chance of failing. But if they actually sat down and actually looked at it realistically, right, and practicing maybe that tragic optimism, what is the likelihood this is actually going to happen, or the results are going to be better, and what can I actually do to mitigate some of this stuff, right, if something bad actually happened, right? And when they actually lay out all of these things, they'll realize, hey, actually,
there's nothing.
Quitting my job is not actually the worst thing, right? And trying
even
to
going bankrupt is not even that bad.
Exactly. Yeah. Like everybody could start again, right? They could just get that job at it's that status thing. But yeah, I mean, you could pick up your feet, right?
Yeah.
Everybody could pick up their feet afterwards.
I just know that building brand will always be a great backup anyways.
Of course,
So I can do basically that's great advice. I love that. I'm going to go back to Tim Ferriss's fear setting. And that's why we love having you on Dangerous Ideas. And I'm going to pitch you something.
Sure.
I want to do it on the camera just to get your confirmation.
Okay, all right.
I would love to have you as a regular on this pod. I don't know how many, every couple weeks. I would love to have you on this pod, breaking down Dangerous Ideas. I know you're a busy guy, but I would love to have you as a regular, because like I said, Dangerous Ideas per paragraph, per sentence. I mean, you have it. So you down to come regularly?
I'll do my best.
My goal is to have you at least 5 times a year.
5 times a year. Okay. Yeah.
Wow. The hesitation. No.
Well, I'm hesitating because I don't make it out to camp. I actually work remote all the time. So, but yeah, I mean, I'll do my best to make it work.
Well, we'll try to make it easy. We'll bring a helicopter.
If this podcast is successful, okay, this episode is like the best one.
It's going to be great. Well, yeah. I really appreciate you coming on the pod. A pleasure.
Appreciate you having me. Yeah.
Listen, Dangerous Ideas, rate, review, follow, subscribe, whatever you got to do. Wang Yip from The Dip. Thank you so much for coming out.
Thanks, Shawn.